a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on effective methods for developing peers and leveling up your mentorship skills. This is a LeadDev webinar in partnership with Code Climate. We'll be coming together today with some exciting news in our horizon. LeadDev will be in San Francisco for the first time ever on October 26 and 27. I'll be your host. When we say San Francisco, we really mean Oakland. If you're a local to here, when we say San Francisco, we don't really mean Oakland. When we mean Oakland, we don't really mean San Francisco. So even though it says San Francisco, it's actually in Oakland. And I'm really happy about that because I live in Oakland and it's in my neighborhood. So very convenient to me. I like events that cater to my needs and my preferences. So welcome all to the East Bay. For some of us, we never crossed the bridge. Get ready to be warm and don't forget your layers. So yeah, I'll be your host in Oakland, not San Francisco, even though it's San Francisco, we cover that. And our panelists in here will be speakers on the event. Tickets are still available, so if you don't have one and you're jelly and you want to come, please head over to the LeadDev website and get yours. All right, if you're current also managing managers or about to become a manager of managers, please check out Lead and Eng San Francisco. This is a LeadDev's new event for senior technology leaders, heads, directors, and VPs of engineering. And this will take place on October 28th in actual San Francisco. This is not an Oakland event, this is a San Francisco event. So if you don't want to cross the bridge for a third day, you get to stay in town, everybody wins. So we have then two events that I told you about, LeadDev in Oakland and Lead Eng San Francisco in actual San Francisco. So back to today. The webinar that we are here to participate on will last 45 minutes and there will be glorious 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the Slack and we'll answer some of your questions in the Effective Teams channel. So that's a good place to go and ask questions if we run out of time. But if we have some time, we'll be able to answer some questions live. So please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and I'll do my best to integrate them as the conversation keeps going. One final announcement, or the last announcement before we get started. Jem won't be here today, but it's for the best excuse ever. So there's two excuses for never coming to an event. One is you getting married. The second best is if you're having a baby. So Jem, welcome. He's a baby boy just last night. So we're overjoyed for Jem. Hopefully at the beginning of the whirlwind that is going to be like have a newborn and not being able to get some sleep. It's a joyous time. We're very happy for Jem. And you won't be able to see them here, but it's for the best. All right, let's kick this off with introductions. My name is Ines Sombra, and today I'll be joined by Adi, Javier, Vanessa, and Anna to share their experiences and insight. We have many views represented. We have the views of individual contributors, managers, organizational peers, and we also have many tenures represented too. So our hope is our advice are going to become applicable and even just like matching or like at least fit. There's something for you to take away wherever you are in your engineering, either like IC journey or your management journey. So let's get started with some introductions. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself and pass it to the next panelist?
Hola, my name is Ana Margarita Medina. I'm currently a staff developer advocate at Lightstep. I'm going to be representing the IC view. I've been working in engineering officially for 13 years and been coding for around 15, 16. I come from a full stack development background, and 6 years ago, I started really focusing on site reliability engineering. And that's what a lot of my last 6 years have been in the space of cloud infrastructure, chaos engineering, DevOps, cloud native, and fun stuff. And I owe a lot of my expertise to a lot of my peers and mentors that allowed me to get my foot in the door. I'm going to pass it on over to Vanessa to introduce herself.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, I'm Vanessa Huerta Granda. I am currently a solutions engineer at Jelly.io, helping you all learn from incidents. I'm also an individual contributor, making the transition from management to individual contributor. I have worked in technology for the past decade, really focusing on operations, site reliability engineering. I'm a huge, huge incident fan. I love incidents. I get a rush from them, but I also love learning from them. I'm incredibly passionate about learning from the incidents that we have and moving forward and doing that as a community. So yeah, I'm going to pass it along to Adi.
Hey folks, I'm Addy. I'm a senior staff engineering manager working on the Chrome team at Google. I've been there for about 10 years, focused on making the web fast and working on the web and in the industry for about 20 years. I'll be representing the EM view.
Oh no, we lost Addy.
Ooh, dropped
Addy,
off
you're
there.
back. You're back.
I'm back. I'll be representing the EM view today. I'm gonna hand things off to Javier next.
Thanks, Adi. Hey everyone, my name is Javier. I am based here in San Francisco. I'm a 2 times startup founder. Total time as an entrepreneur, it's about 8 years. Lived and worked in Spain, Brazil, and more recently in the US. My latest startup was acquired by ClassPass, which is the largest fitness and wellness marketplace in the world. And I oversaw a bunch of teams at ClassPass with engineers, engineering managers, and I also ran and created the mentorship program for engineering, which is an interesting one. I also oversaw the career ladder. And more recently, as of the last 2 weeks, I actually joined Meta as a senior engineering manager working on the Integrity org. It's not public, but now it is. And happy to be here with everyone representing a manager position.
Awesome. We'll keep your secret, Javier. No,
Please.
nobody will know here. Cool. A little bit about myself. I actually had a very big conflict whenever I saw in paper that I had over 20 years of experience. So now going on, I'm going to call myself a child prodigy. So yeah, and I represent also like the views of individual contributors turned into engineering managers too. Let's get started. All right, so we're here today to talk about mentorship, coaching, and sponsorship. But these things are not the same. So the first question to the panel is like, how do we define them? What do they mean for us? Addy, would you mind getting us started?
Yeah, certainly. I'll do my best to define these terms. So I think of a coach as someone who asks powerful, motivating questions to people so they can ideally come up with some of the answers themselves. They usually coach you on a particular dimension that you feel is a gap in your career. A mentor advises you. They're usually somebody that has more experience than their mentees. They might be a few steps ahead in their career, and they may have depth in a topic that you want to become a little bit more knowledgeable about. Sponsorship is a little bit different. It's about usually somebody that has a strong reputation in an organization that may be relatively senior. They're going to be someone that is, perhaps putting their name and reputation on the line for somebody else. They usually talk about you. They act on your behalf. They may be opening up new doors and new opportunities. That's at least how I think about those definitions.
How does that resonate with the rest of the panelists? Anything to add? I see spaces of strong consensus. That's great. Okay, so we are all in agreement and when the definitions mean to us. What do we think is distinctive about them? Vanessa, would you like to get us started?
Yes, thank you. So when I think about what's distinctive, if I am a mentor, I think I'm focused on somebody's larger trajectory of their career versus if I'm a coach, I'm thinking about individual skills that we're hoping to work on, individual types of work that they do maybe. And like Addy mentioned, if I'm a coach, I'm doing a lot of asking questions. If I'm a mentor, I'm doing a lot of sharing my experiences. And then as a sponsor, that's a completely different thing. And when we think of sponsorship, I thought it was a new thing, but really it's something that has existed always, just not always for a lot of like underrepresented folks. And so it's about that putting yourself on the line. Sometimes that mentorship or that coaching relationship is a one-on-one thing, but a sponsorship is you're including your community, you're including the people who you work with around there.
Anything anyone else would like to add?
Just a comment on the sponsorship one. I think it's the one that has the most skin in the game because people are putting their reputation in front there and the social capital just to bring someone up, right? And I've seen many cases in which it's opening for opportunities and roles, even like sponsorship of visas for folks that are like immigrants. And it's really amazing when it happens and that you can really tell that someone is putting the skin in the game when they do it.
I also think about it in terms of like you sharing your power or privilege. Like, so it's just like you're transferring on and making opportunities for others. Yeah, Anna?
I think that's actually one of like the most important things to call out when we talk about this topic. Like Vanessa alluded, like underrepresented folks didn't really get access to sponsorship until more recently that we're having these discussions. So I think it's like a very big asterisk that's like if you're in a position of power, like try to find ways to sponsor folks. I know that a lot of the folks that eventually got a chance to sponsor me, whether it was to do a lot of more advocacy work, a lot of more being on larger conference stages to share my engineering expertise, like they really did put their name out there, but it also allowed me to uplift myself. And like Vanessa said, like I uplifted my community with it. So you can, if you're looking for making a large impact, like us engineers like to think about, like sometimes that is like one of the most crucial things. But at the same time, like that doesn't mean that the other like aspects and like mentorship and coaching are not important. It's just that they're all very different touches.
And they're fluid, right? Because even though you in a same relation, you can have elements of all of them. So even though we make distinctions right now, we're gonna just kind of blend them all together as we give you advice. So first, we wanted to make sure that you knew that there's like we are aware that there's differences between them. But then in a same relation, you can have elements of mentorship, you can have elements of coaching, and you can have elements of sponsorship as well. So I am not going to ask you to differentiate going forward because we're hoping that the listener and or the future reader will be able to read between the lines about what we mean, unless we want to clarify that. So good. So then we start with just like the definitions, and then we set the precedent that we're going to just like model them all together as well, because relationships with people are that. So let's talk about the challenges and the misconceptions that we have when we think about this type of relationships. Javier, what do you think is something that is out to be discussed? Sorry.
Right. Yeah, there are many challenges that can happen. I would like to maybe start by tying this back to the topic, which is growing your peers, right? And then I will break it down into two major buckets there. One is mentorship, coaching, sponsorship. Those are like a agreed upon relationship in which someone is going to mentor someone else and it's going to help that person grow. There's another bucket, which is more unstructured, right? When you're working within an organization, you're working with peers, and sometimes you might observe things that can be done better, right? There's no mentorship relationship established there, but still there is value in how you can help other people grow through the things that you see, right? And so I will just open the discussion with those two buckets. For the first bucket, things that can be challenging or can go wrong when you have like a mentorship relationship established. Maybe I will start by just going to the basics. For example, if you are a mentor, I think the first ground rule to have is that always listen and pay attention to the conversation, right? Nothing is more detrimental than being in a mentorship relationship and your mentor not listening to you, or they are like typing in the computer, replying an email, Slack message. It can be a net negative to the mentee if the mentor is not paying attention, and you get out of the mentorship relationship feeling worse than you got into the mentorship relationship, which is no go. For the mentee, another ground rule could be always do your homework. Like when you come to the mentorship session, come with something prepared, right? You want to make it the most effective time that you can get, and just doing your homework, it's really, really crucial for it to work well. So that's for the bucket of like established mentorship relationships. In the other bucket of like the more unstructured, I think that is actually more delicate and challenging, and really depends on the cultural norms that you have within the organization, right? Because there are three angles of feedback or accountability that you can think of. There's the manager direct report relationship. That is very obvious. A manager will always try to mentor and give feedback to the direct reports, right? Second one is upwards. It's now more established. However, in some organizations, so depending on the manager, you also have to be delicate with that relationship too. And the less obvious one is peer-to-peer. And I talk about this 360 degree of accountability of an organization in which anyone should feel empowered to come to someone and say like, hey, in this discussion here, this fact, this behavior, this observation could have been done in a different way. Now, we're then talking about giving feedback, and that gets challenging because there are many ways that it can go wrong, right? And so, but it's still part of like growing your organization when you feel that you are accountable for yourself, for your manager, for your reports, and also everyone that is a peer of you.
Things that we would like to add to Javier's excellent statements. Adi, you haven't spoken in a while. I'm gonna call on you.
Sure thing. I can zoom into one aspect of challenges around tenure, and I know that we'll talk a little bit about how you go about finding mentors and sponsors later. But I think that one aspect of tenure that's interesting is if you've been at a company for many years, you may have deeper, well-established relationships with people than folks who haven't. And you may have built up trust, those relationships, those friendships over time. Maybe you've worked on same projects as a lot of people. That can influence your ability to find mentors for different topics and find sponsors. Maybe it's a little bit easier. Hopefully you've maintained those relationships well. Maybe you haven't. Hopefully you have. But if you've only been somewhere a very short amount of time, finding those opportunities might be trickier. Especially if you're trying to make the relationships genuine and make sure that it's clear to people you ideally want to mentor you what they're going to get out of it. What are your shared goals? Where are you aligned? What is the value you're all going to get out of the relationship? I think that aspect of tenure is worth folks thinking about proactively when they're trying to seek mentorship.
Anna, when we were also talking about challenges, you mentioned motives and then like the perception of somebody's motives. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was actually just looking at my notes of that. I think one of the big misconceptions that folks in the room sometimes have is that automatically, once I start mentoring folks, like my career is going to progress. An example of that could be like, as you're up leveling your engineering skills, you might think, well, we're having interns coming in. If I mentor 5 for the next 3 to 6 months, by the next promo, for sure, I have to be getting my senior title. And like those first, that's a terrible motive for reasons to do like mentoring or any type of relationship where you're up leveling someone, because one, you should be doing it because you want to help someone, you want to see someone succeed, you want to share your knowledge. So you're kind of already going with the wrong motive. But at the same time, like, it's a huge misconception because your time could be better spent in other areas that you can actually maybe be more likely to get your promo. Like, this is not going to be the thing that your manager VP is going to say, and it's like, oh, Jewel got a chance to mentor these 3 people, and in the summer they also did these 2. Like, this is now their new package. I think that's one of the biggest things to keep in mind. And then one of the misconceptions that I guess that I see a lot of the mentors that I've had, or even when it comes to coaches, is that the advice that they're giving is not necessarily going to work out because I do not look like them. So this could be something like tenure. I haven't been in an organization long enough to be part of the OG crew of the startup in order for people to actually take my advice and think that my mental model of the system that I'm looking at, that I understand it because I wasn't in the first few like architecture decisions that got made. But it's like I went ahead and learned it, or like had enough talks, like those things like can't compare. But then there's also the part where your advice might be like, go give this type of presentation and use this very direct approach to have this relationship with your manager. But because I am a Latina and I'm a female, I might just speak with my hands, and that might be coming off as an aggressive and as emotional. So these are things that you kind of sometimes have to keep in mind with the privilege of being in a spot to give advice to someone, where it's like, wait, this actually might not work out. And like one of the other examples that I give is that like through my career, I ended up dropping out of college because I learned that I could learn better on my own. But I also don't go ahead and give that advice out to folks because I understand my privilege as a white passing Latina, where it's like, well, those doors opened for me a little easier possibly than some other folks. So maybe go do your own research. So there's ways to go around it where you can kind of think of like, what systems is this person going to go against? And is my advice actually going to be effective? But at the same time, is there ways that I can give them different avenues to approach this problem, provide pros and cons, and then also allow for them to choose? But this also lets them grow into the motive of using their own muscles to make decisions.
That's really great. That kind of blends beautifully into like the next question that I had. Is just like, how do you become a better mentor? There is one thing that I wanted to kind of bring to the panelists before we move on to that one. It's like the timelines. Do we feel that it matters? Like, because we say tenure, it's also like the tenure of the mentor, the coach, or the mentee, because your advice as you grow and learn more becomes different. Have folks that have been in mentorship relationships noticed that? And then how do you think about the timeline of a relationship and the progression of your own career and the person that you're in a relationship with?
I think in my experience, it's helpful as a mentor to have that long view. I'm able to see the big picture while at the same time put myself in the shoes of the person that I'm mentoring. And I've experienced that as a mentor and as a mentee, where I've spoken to someone who has many, many more decades in their career than I do. And they're able to tell me like, hey, the problems that you're having right now may seem like they're huge, but this is kind of how big your career can be, while at the same time not minimizing what I'm experiencing at the moment.
Another thing too is that how to become a better mentor is almost like how to become a better runner. Like you have to put yourself in the spot and do it, right? And get some feedback as well to how things are going. To your point of, it's not just about output of like, oh, I'm mentoring 5 people. Let's talk about outcomes. How are those mentorship relationships going? And how are those people feeling that they're learning better with you? And that's going to make you a better mentor over time. And so it's a matter of doing it as well and putting yourself in the spot and learning from other mentors too. I think every organization will find that there are some, if you look at mentorship graph as a graph and the nodes are the people, you'll find that there are some super nodes that everyone wants to get mentorship from because they are like great mentors and they have the time to mentor too, right? It's important to learn from those and then have a graph in which it's just not everything condensed into this one node and everyone can become a better mentor and you have this transitive learning experience from learning from others, right? And that the organization will be more resilient that way. So putting yourself in the spot and working with great mentors and to see how they do, I think there are 2 ways to just be better over time.
There's a question from, yeah, go ahead, Vanessa.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I love what you said, Javier, about just being able to take a retrospective look to see how this mentorship program is going, how people are doing, if it's working, if it's not working, what can be moved around. That's incredibly important.
A question from the audience was, do we feel that has the move to remote work make mentorship harder? Mentorship, coaching, and on sponsorship, we're going to bundle them together. What do we think? Adi, you haven't spoken in a while. I'm going to call on you.
Oh, sure. I in my experience, it hasn't made a huge difference. There are very minor, like in my personal experience, I haven't noticed too much difference. There are small things like, you may not go out for a lunch or a coffee with somebody, but that's a small thing. Like you can still have a lot of the valuable conversation with them. I tend to find that the structure of mentorship, coaching, and sponsorship relationships is very, very similar. If you're, dialing in over a video call or you're talking to somebody in person. So, building on top of what Javier said earlier, you listen, you empathize, you try to identify your mentee's strengths, you provide feedback, you try to be proactive about the relationship. I think it's really important that even if you're speaking to somebody over a call, that you're still trying to be in the moment and engaging with them as much as possible. I think it's important to be accessible and follow up. And these are the same things you'd be doing, if you were there in person. You'd have to follow up, try to give them, opportunities to connect with other people who can also fill in some of those gaps in their knowledge they're trying to look out for. So I think that the structure doesn't change too much.
I would add that the move to remote does open up this universe of mentors, whereas I'm in Chicago and maybe I would have used mentors that are within my geographical area, but right now I'm talking to people who are all over the world.
Awesome. So go ahead, Anna.
I feel like Manessa makes like an amazing point where it's like the world is endless of the people you've like looked up to, and now that they're actually available for you to like get mentorship from them or like take any learnings from them. And at the same time, at least like in my personal experience, like pandemic fatigue has just been insane. And it's like any type of space that I would usually have to mentor is like now non-existent. So like I'm too burnt out to be able to do it. And a lot of it would also be like it's easier to meet people while I'm traveling to different places and kind of like find new opportunities where I can provide advice to help up level folks. But you kind of have to be a lot more intentional in like a distributed workforce. And I think if you're not really trying to make it a goal in your year to be like, I really want to up level folks, or if I find folks with these qualities, I really want to make sure to get them into these opportunities, you're gonna have a really like big struggle.
All right, there's a lot of questions about how, which is great because that was a question that we were about to start. So like, I think this audience is reading us like a book. So how do we find them? How do we find mentorships, coaches, some sponsors? And with the nice thing about it is that we have like two views in here. So let's start with the engineering managers in here. Like in our roles, we often set up these mentorship programs. What are the tips and what are the advice that we have as we're setting them up? Javier, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, I can get started on that. And I think an important point to make here is that I think mentorship programs help cover a gap in which I think it's important to recognize that it takes courage to raise your hand and say that you need help and you want to learn something and you want to be a mentee, right? In this industry where imposter syndrome is so prevalent across all of the roles, right? It takes courage to do that. So a mentorship program is a way of normalizing or even more celebrating that mentorship is important. And that learning is fundamentally one of the most important things that you can do, as well as teaching when you have something to teach others, right? And so within that context, how to find mentors from an EM point of view, from an organization point of view. I think 2 points. One I will make is it's important to incentivize teaching. Just because you can have an organization where maybe mentorship is not valued because you want every single person to be doing product work and shipping things, right? And then the moment that someone spends half of their time teaching others within that organization, that's not going to be accepted or rewarded. And so having the right incentive structure it's important. Obviously, you need to account for the extremes of like someone just doing that because they want to get that promotion, to the point that Anna made earlier, right? But I think incentives are important. And the second point of finding mentors, I think fundamentally mentoring is an activity of working with people. And so you have to like to work with people, not just with code or systems or data. You have to enjoy the fact of sitting with someone and, explaining a thing that maybe you have done it 100 times, and you explain it again, and you find joy in that. Because the moment that you find joy in doing that, you're just going to be a better mentor. And so finding those people, it's important in the first place to just have a pool of people that will be able to be effective mentors, and they will enjoy the process too.
I actually like put it in terms of expectations. Like the more senior you are, or when you know that you're excelling at a specific skill, I actually like have a little list. I'll be like, oh, this person really knows about this. So eventually I'll be like, how is your mentorship, or what are you giving back to the environment, and how are you helping others? And I put a little thing, and then I remember who else is looking for something else. And I'll be like, you would like to learn about architectures at scale. This person will now do this. And then I happen to be in a position where I can be like, you're now in this list. These are my expectations for you. This is the time, and this is a continuity, and these are the people that are looking for like even soundboards or someone. So I tend to actually set them in terms of like the skills that somebody can have. I do them as expectations for the role. The more senior you are, my expectations will be that you're giving back and you're helping others grow and level up. And then I just like pattern match them on a little spreadsheet, and I'm like, this is what I hope that you do. It's just like, I think at this point, my programs are like very, very lightweight, 45 minutes per month. And then I don't put more than two mentees per mentor, especially as they're learning how to become better mentors. That's how I tend to approach them. Adi.
Oh, just to tack on to what Javier was saying, as a manager, I think it can be valuable to identify, specific folks in your team who could benefit from, not just specific kinds of mentorship, but also just awareness about mentorship programs that might match up well with them. I found that even with very senior engineers, sometimes they just don't know where to start, or they don't know which of the many mentorship or coaching programs they should be checking out. And so just helping people map that out more cleanly can be helpful.
I also tend to set awareness that both are learning. So if you've never worked with a mentor before, then just like, I'm like, look, this person is a fresh mentor, you're a fresh mentee. So that's why I tend to focus with that individual skill, because at least it's easier to talk about, like, for example, architectural patterns or just like evolutionary design. And then at that point, both folks get something there. Javier, you were going to add something else.
Yeah, just something that I've seen good reception. It's like, we all know this mythological idea of the 10x engineer, right? That's not real. However, you can think of a 10x engineer being someone that will help 5 people be twice as better. And I think that's more realistic, right?
Cute.
It's a way to just frame the conversation in a way, hey, if you help 5 people to be better, then you might be a 10x engineer.
But you basically put it in the expectations. It's similar. It's just like we expect you to help others. Yeah. Vanessa, anything from your perspective?
I don't know how I raised my hand, but yeah, I love what you're saying, Ines. I like to consider myself sometimes a little bit of a matchmaker when it comes to mentors and mentees, even from the individual contributor part. I work a lot with incidents, which means that I get to see what's happening across the organization, and I get to see, I see this person coming to a lot of retrospectives and they know a lot, and this other person I think can get really good at this one thing. So let's match them up together. Obviously, as an individual contributor, you're using your social capital to make those relationships happen and take place. And even for me, I've certainly taken mentors and mentees when I've seen that happening. If I've been at a lot of incidents and I see some characteristics that I'd like to either emulate or teach to others. But definitely it's helpful when management sees the value in that. And I love that you put that as part of like the role description, where you have to manage people as the more senior you get.
And I think that also addresses the motivation that Sarana was saying. It is like 5 mentees is nothing. I just expect you to like help someone along. There is a question of someone in the audience. I would say, what strategies can you offer someone who has tenure and is being managed, coached, mentored by someone who's less experienced? And I think that this question is kind of tricky and packs a lot. And if I have opinions, but I'm wondering, what are the opinions of the panel? While you're thinking,
Really,
yeah, Adi, go for it.
I'll share a quick thought. I think this is a really tricky one. On one hand, I firmly believe you do not have to have as much tenure as the person that you're mentoring in order for that mentorship to be valuable to you. There are folks who can ask really good questions, even if they have less experience than you do in certain facets of life or your career. And they may be able to express a dimension that you don't actually have as much expertise in as you think you have. I'll be very concrete there. So as I said earlier, I've been in the industry for 20 years. I can imagine maybe I've seen it all. I haven't. There are folks who only have 5 years of experience or 3 years of experience who have insight into things that I do not, just because the way that they've approached and gotten into the industry or solved problems is very different. And so I always look at those differences as potentially being an opportunity for you to still learn more from the person. It's very nuanced, but there are still places where that can be valuable.
That was beautifully put. Because, yeah, Javier.
Definitely agree with that. And in a visual way to put it is like you get two people with their skills and you draw a Venn diagram of the skills and what they know. There's going to be some overlapping areas and some areas that don't overlap. You can always learn something from everyone. That's a thing that I believe. Even a junior person joining an organization 6 months in can teach you something. And it's important to recognize that. And so again, I think the question is tricky from more like a long-term mentorship relationship, but you can learn anything from anyone. And I think it's important to just call that out and recognize it.
Yeah, so there's hierarchy in the workplace, and this also doesn't necessarily mean that in these relationships, like the hierarchy like applies or is secretly beneficial. So I think that keeps popping up in the questions where folks are thinking about mentorship or even just coaching as things that happens between a boss and a direct report. It's great if your boss happens to be a good coach, a good mentor, and a good sponsor. At that point, you have a really good boss. So my recommendation would be like latch onto the boss and follow the boss forever because you got a good one. But there are situations in which your boss like may not necessarily be an excellent coach or may not necessarily be like a good advocate, and then that sucks. It's also not your fault. So don't tend to just couple like this. The advice would be, or like at least what we've been trying to say, like synthesize is like there's more fluidity in this type of relationships, and this is why it's also it makes them annoying and they're just like very non. Like if you're looking at a checkbox or a list of things that are very like literal, this is all fuzzy. So, Anna, in your experience, how have you sussed out these programs, or how have you tried to like approach finding a mentor or something that is meaningful or helpful to you?
So as far as me, I'm a millennial, and I would say the best place for me to have found mentors has actually been social media. Very much Twitter has been that place where, because I've been sharing a lot of my thoughts of like first started out as a front-end developer and really got into like the communities in that space and was able to find leaders that I could ask questions to and like develop relationships with, that has kept on my entire career. So like think of using the tools that are out there, and like as we were saying, like the whole remote world like now opens up the opportunity that you can find anyone that you can find a mentorship with. The other place that has worked out really well for me has been like any type of community space. So conferences and meetups usually have a space for one to be able to find mentors, network with one another. I think networking at the end of the day is like a big backbone into the conversations that we're having. It's all about the relationships that you're building, what you take and give. And with networking, you might start being able to create the little spreadsheet that Vanessa and Ines were talking about, of being able to put matchmaking, and like you can do it for other people and you can start doing it for yourself. Like once I start having like, or once I realize in what portion of engineering I want to have an expertise on, these are the types of people that I could reach out to. Or when I join an organization as large as this, I can reach out to one of these three individuals. So you can kind of think about it that way. And as I mentioned, like those conferences have also sometimes like Slack channels or virtual communities that you can be joining. So you can look in general at any type of Slack group as an access point, a door into another group of folks. I just kind of did a check on the LeadDev Slack, and they do have a mentoring channel. So if you're looking to mentor folks or want to like looking for a mentor or looking to mentor folks or even have more conversations around coaching and sponsoring, I'm sure that's a place that you can actually reach out to. So sometimes like you might look at places that you're already in and not realize that there's actually already an avenue that has been established for you to go about it. But if you kind of look at that and you think that's like very heavy handed, or you have imposter syndrome and you don't want to put yourself out there like that, you can actually look a little closer to you. You actually might notice that your company actually might have programs around mentorship. I know that like at my current organization, and even when I was at Uber, they did have mentorship programs that were established. Some of them you can actually reach out to them via like employee like resource groups, or they have like mentorship weeks, or like when it came to like onboarding week, you went through so many like engineering education classes that you start building relationships with people and can kind of like start asking around. So a lot of it is just putting yourself out there that you are seeking to help up-level someone, or that you're looking to up-level yourself.
That's awesome. And I think that it also highlights the fact that two things that you said that are really important, and I want to make sure that we highlight it. First of all, it's like you see like mentorship relationships also outside work. And actually, I think that this is the most valuable thing that you could do for your career is like have folks inside work that you just go to, but also like the folks that are not in your company, so that you seek input, advice, or soundboarding from is huge, because there's advantages on just like somebody not being in the cultural makeup of the place that you're in. They have fresh perspectives, and also like you have a support structure that is stationary through your career as opposed to where you are in an individual place. So I think that you hinted at that, and I think that is extremely valuable too. So all right, so we covered like we're structuring programs. Adi.
Oh, I just wanted to quickly share when there are ICs on my team who are trying to find mentors, the three things that I tend to recommend they do is, first of all, like have a very clear picture of your goals, not just your short-term goals, but also your long-term goals. The more specific that you are with those goals, the easier that it can be to find the right mentor for you. Another thing I suggest is like having a good list of like who are the people that you look up to. If you can keep a running list of the jobs and the people, like have that clear picture in your head, that can help you map back to people who could be potentially good candidates to reach out to for mentorship. And then it's important to, like, I found it's important to form a good elevator pitch when you are approaching somebody asking for a big time commitment. When you're clear about your goals and why you think that person is going to be the right mentor for you, that can certainly help with the conversation. Just be like open about what the time commitment expectations you have are with them and why you think they can add a lot of value. I think that having that structure in mind can sometimes be helpful.
And also sometimes you don't need the full-time commitment. Like some of the biggest points of advice and injections into my career have been like, should I quit this job? And then I happen to be like with somebody, and then they just tell you the perspective, and it's just like, it doesn't have to be like, not all of them, the relationships have to be that long or stuffy. I personally, when I was an individual contributor, like maybe it's just like the background of the fact that you're like a woman in tech or something. I don't look for mentors. I look for people that I can actually take inputs in specific places. And I don't assume that there's going to be like that structured relationship, because quite frankly, for like me, or at least maybe I just given up or self-selected out, I don't believe that they happen. Where like you're gonna get like the professorial thing with the patches in the arm that will be like, hey girl, this is how you shape your career. I don't believe in that. So I'm not that dogmatic. So what I look for is like, again, adding to your point, people that I respect or people whose viewpoints are slightly different than mine that would give me sources of input in an undiluted fashion. I don't need somebody to tell me what I already know or just like validate and vet my feelings. But like I am just kind of in a situation where just like it may be just like some small piece of advice or somebody that would be able to help. And at that point, it makes all the difference. Anna, back to you.
The last thing I wanted to add is that like you don't have to look for mentors and sponsors only within your industry. So as an engineer, we don't always have to be close-minded and think of like only engineering managers, VP of engineering can like be folks that can actually up-level my career. Like you can still learn a lot from a VP of marketing or any type of like C-level person to like a CEO at a nonprofit. So like don't think that because they don't have engineering in their title, you're just going to be like, oh, I'm going to tune out of this conversation and not listen to them or not respect them, because one, that's rude. And two, like you can open yourself up to a whole different perspective or different ways to look at a problem. And like, that's the beauty of being human. We can be learning from so many different sectors of life.
All right. So we talked about a little bit of like what it means, how we structure, how we find them, how we become better at it. Let's talk about how we end one or how we leave a relationship once it starts. As we're getting closer to the end of this panel, how do we leave or how we end a mentoring coaching or a mentoring coaching relationships? Vanessa, would you like to?
Not by ghosting. We were chatting earlier, and I think Anna and I have both ghosted mentor or mentee relationships before, and you know what, those things happen sometimes. But I'm looking back, I think it's always important to leave a working relationship in a good state if possible, right? So if for some reason you're breaking off the mentor-mentee relationship, just being honest, being grateful, addressing what's happening. Like, I don't have time for this. I don't think I'm the right person for this, but I've seen you grow in X, Y, or Z, and I look forward to hearing more from you. Look forward to seeing your success. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? Like I'm still not seeing my pediatrician. I now see a different doctor because I'm in a different stage of my life, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, when you're structuring a program, maybe you put an end date at the beginning.
Me too. Oh, I love that. I love when things have end dates.
Yeah, I mean, like, okay, just like do it for this, and this is like time coming, so you help folks move on. I think in my life, I accidentally ended coaching relationships or mentorship relationships without knowing. Where like when you just get so swamped and you go from like things that are on fire versus things like there, and it's just like now I'm going through all of the connections in my life, and I'm like, ooh, how many people could feel that way too? Sometimes it happens, so yeah.
And that's okay. And that, you're releasing somebody, and maybe they can then use that time to find another mentor that is better fitting for them.
Yeah. Advice from the rest of the panelists. How would you approach ending a mentorship coaching relationship?
I will just add one note, which is like for a mentorship relationship to be successful, it doesn't need to last X amount of time, even not the expected amount of time that you thought earlier. You might find the value 3 weeks into the relationship and then you're done. And that's fine, and you can call it out. I think from a mentor perspective too, it's important to, sometimes I found that mentees might be in a position where they are not learning as much anymore, but they don't want to tell you. And so ask the question, is this still being useful to you? Just put it out, and you find that sometimes it's done, and that's fine. And then we'll both move on, and it's so good.
I tend to set up like a pre-agenda. So especially if I'm just like having somebody that is earlier in their career or like trying to structure a company, I'm like, all right, what is the pre-agenda? And if the person doesn't come prepared at all, I'm like, look, this, yeah. Addy.
I like to try, I've certainly been ghosted before. I try to set expectations early on in the relationship, and we'll say, okay, well, let's review 3 months from now or 6 months from now or 12 months from now, whether this is still useful, but try to set some initial deadlines in mind so that their expectations, people know when we're probably going to wrap up. Doesn't always work out that way, but at least, we've had that conversation. And so if we do end it earlier, they kind of know.
Questions for the go ahead.
I was just going to add that ghosting is definitely like a really hard thing to do. Sometimes like relationships are going to fizzle out, and that's okay. I do think that as like I've was preparing for this panel, thinking back, it was like setting goals was definitely, I think, the best way that I see as my relationships going forward in that type of space, because it lets you really have those clear expectations. But at the same time, I also hold the belief that folks that I've had as mentors and sponsors, that door is open as like a lifetime opportunity, that I feel like I can always reach out to them if I do need something in the future. So kind of like Vanessa alluded, like try to always keep a relationship where you don't burn that bridge, and unless you kind of really have to.
Yeah. There's a question in here that asks, what has mentorship look like for us? And I think we've described it just in little bits and pieces. But if we wanted to kind of start summarizing, like for me, it is like that short burst of people that I seek out for specific things. And then there may be some basically friends that you have along the way, or that relationship turns into like your support network over time. What has it looked like for the folks in the panel? Has it been formal? Like, I think the person in here in the question wants to know, it's just, if it's formal, if you've had a formal one versus like fluid.
I've had both.
How does it look like?
I've had formal relationships, formal like programs, which is really, really helpful because I'm an introvert and it's hard for me to like go and reach out to others. So having like a formalized setting is really, really helpful. I've also, sometimes just talk to friends. I'm a new mother. And so I reach out to people who aren't even in my industry, and I'm like, hey, like, what do you do when you do this or that? chat. My biggest relationship right now is with a former manager of mine, and we're not even in the same industry anymore, but we still chat about work things and communication and some things that I want to get better at. So yeah, a mix of all.
And when you say formal, you also mean paid coaching and paid mentorship, when your environment just makes a coach available to you?
I've personally never paid, but when my workplace has made that available for me.
Cool. Adi, how has it been for you?
I would say that one realization for me over the years was that sometimes you can fall into this model of thinking that you only have one mentor at a time, and that doesn't have to be the case at all. There are many aspects you might want to grow in, and so having almost a team or a board of people that you think about as your mentors can also be useful. And so for me, many of those have been informal mentorships coupled with maybe a small number of formal mentorships, and that's been enough for me to get the value I was looking for. So I try not to have too rigid, I guess, a thought process around it, but having multiple mentors has been useful to me.
Javier?
Yeah, maybe I'll add a couple of points here. When I had my own startups, I did have for a couple of years some paid executive coaching. I think specifically the emotional toll when you were running your own startup, and it's pretty tough. And I think there are many blind spots that I had, and that was super helpful from a coaching point of view. But more from a day-to-day type of thing, the one mantra that I've always followed is to try to work with people that are way smarter than I am. When I see them, I'll just try to chase them and try to work with them. Because just being around those folks, it's just, you're going to learn. If you pay attention and you just interact with them and you work with them, it's a great way of learning. I know maybe it's not called mentorship, but I will always try to chase people that are just much better than me in certain areas that I want to grow. And then just stay close to them for a while, absorb everything. And maybe at some point, then I'll move on with those learnings to another area.
Yeah, awesome. That really helps people that you admire too, and also you feel safe around. So, all right, folks, we're at time. It has been a lovely morning. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the folks asking questions. There's a lot of questions. I haven't been able to get to them all. Sorry, I try to integrate them as best as I can, but there's always a Slack channel, and there's always a conference where you're going to see the panelists giving talks. So let's remind ourselves where the conference is going to be. The LeadDev is going to be in San Francisco, but not San Francisco, it's really Oakland on October 26, 27. And again, everyone in this panel will be there. And just to close up, can you tell us all what you're going to be speaking about? Let's start with Javier, who I'm interrupted in every conversation we've had. Javier, what's you're going to talk to be about?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about spotting and growing new managers and how to match the skills to the environment that they will be operating in, and more from a manager perspective, and the traps that you have to look up and to avoid. It's going to be a lot of personal experience and scars that have grown over time.
Anna, what is your talk going to be about?
I'm going to be talking about staying reliable, how to actually keep our systems up and healthy. Sometimes we're going to need to fail and learn from those failures in order to push forward. And there's going to be some portions around systems and other parts just around the humans behind the systems.
Vanessa, tell us about your talk.
Mine is about how learning from incidents is a team sport. I know nothing about sports, but I know about incidents. And I know that we often have a lot of a hero culture in operations SRE work, but that doesn't really get us out of the cycle of incidents. It's when we collaborate, when we get together, we're all bought into the process and share different perspectives when learning actually happens and progress happens.
Last but not least, Adi.
I will be talking about effectiveness and scaling your effectiveness as a leader. As engineering leads, we always have kind of an opportunity to scale our effectiveness as our decisions can impact a whole organization. So from reducing sources of friction to optimizing career growth to align with what produces maximal value, I'll be touching on some tips and tricks and frameworks for building effective teams.
Awesome. So yeah, there's still tickets. Come see us. Thank you for spending your morning with us. And if you have any more questions that we can answer, we'll be in the Slack channel. Bye, everyone.
Everyone.